Hello everyone, Silent K here. We've got another batch of cards to review, so let's jump right into it. First up for Bloodcraft, Tove, 2 mana 3/3, can't attack. When an allied neutral follower comes into play, this follower gains rush and can attack. A Tove is a fictional creature named in the poem Jabberwocky, written by Lewis Carroll. This poem was also featured in the second Alice book, Through the Looking Glass, so it's an Alice character sort of by extension. This one's not as strong as some other class neutralcraft cards, but it's not bad. Even when played on curve, your opponent will have to deal with it. Since you're running a neutralcraft deck, you'll obviously be able to proc it next turn. On later turns, it's very easy to combo, so it's an undercosted 2-drop with rush. Not too bad. Overall +1. Next, Boy Who Cried Wolf, 2 mana 3/1, can't be attacked by followers with 1 attack. This card is obviously based on the well-known fable, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. This card is basically an aggro version of Owlcat. 3 attack 2-drops are fairly rare, and most people don't run 1 damage pings, which means this wouldn't be a terrible card for an aggro deck, but Bloodcraft already has access to one of the few 3 attack 2-drops in the game in the form of Serpent Charmer. And even though that card did see some infrequent play when the expansion first came out, it did get phased out completely, and this card isn't any better than that one. So overall -1. Next, Bandersnatch, 5 mana 4/5, rush, enhance 7, gain last words. At the start of your next turn, put a follower that costs at least 6 play points from your deck into play. This is another fictional creature of Lewis Carroll's. This one is mentioned in Jabberwocky, Through the Looking Glass, and another poem called The Hunting of the Snark. This card is kind of clunky in a control deck since a lot of the high cost followers in control decks have powerful fanfares, and this card puts those directly into play so you don't get the fanfare. This is especially bad if it's one of your win condition cards. This could work with aggro decks though. If you top off your curve with Imp Lancers and Soul Dominators, Bandersnatch will always pull a free Storm follower. In general though, fetching specific cards is always good, so this might have even more potential than that. Overall +1 for the utility. Next, Emeralda, Demonic Officer, 7 mana 4/5, fanfare, destroy an enemy follower or amulet. Gain Storm if Vengeance is active for you. Typically you want your hard removal as cheap as possible, so you have the option to either play it early if your opponent is making a power play, or you can gain tempo in the late game by playing it alongside something else. Cards like Pluto and Orb Dragon don't see play because they're much more restrictive, and too often you need to remove something on turn 4 or 5 and you just wish you were running Execution or some other hard removal instead. This card is cheaper than those cards though, and it does have the benefit of sometimes gaining Storm, so it might just be good enough to play in a control deck. Overall, I'll be generous and give it a 0. On to Dragoncraft, Red Rageworm, 3 mana 0/5, can't attack. Evolved, it becomes a 10/10 that can attack. Destroy this follower at the end of your turn. So if you go second and play this on curve, it shouldn't be difficult to evolve it, since your opponent might not be able to deal with the 5 health. And then you can evolve it, deal 10 face damage, and from there you can usually finish them off with a couple decent Dragoncraft Storm followers. In any other scenario though, this card is going to be pretty bad. If you play it in the mid or late game, your opponent can easily remove it for free, so it'll probably make it into some very aggressive decks, but it's still not going to be very consistent in general. Overall 0. Next, Worm God of the Skies, legendary, 9 mana 5/6, last words. During your next turn, double the attack and defense of each allied Dragoncraft follower that comes into play. The 1-turn kill Dream is Forte into Erd. Since this card buffs every Dragoncraft follower that comes into play, and not just ones that are played from your hand, Forte gets the buff twice, 10 + 10 = 20, easy 1-turn kill. Realistically though, this is a slow 9 mana card, and it has to die before it even does anything, so there are inconsistencies with suiciding it and giving your opponent the chance to play around it, and of course there's Banish. For 9 mana, your card has to do something to win the game, and you aren't guaranteed that with this card. Overall -2. Next, Dragon Summoner, 2 mana 1/2, fanfare, put a random Dragoncraft follower from your deck into your hand. So in a normal deck this is basic card draw, but in a neutralcraft deck it could be a very important fetch card. If you're running almost all neutral cards, and just a few Dragoncraft cards, you can easily pull very specific cards. Dragon Summoner can pull itself, but in the late game you can just chain Dragon Summoners until you get the card you need anyway. So in general, it would get a 0, but in the right deck, the utility makes it overall +1. Next, Hippogriff Rider, 5 mana 2/4, Storm. Whenever another allied follower attacks, gain +1/+0. So this is just a win more version of Seabrand Dragon or Phoenix Rider Aina. With Seabrand Dragon you get a consistent 4 damage, and with Aina you get buffs depending on the entire board, so even if you're behind, you'll get more than the default stats. With Hippogriff Rider though, you have to have a board ready to attack, otherwise you're just playing a 2/4 Storm for 5 mana. Overall -1. Onto Forestcraft, Magical Fairy Lilac, 3 mana 1/4, Clash, destroy the enemy follower, then remove this follower's Clash ability. Keep in mind that Clash occurs before damage is dealt, so this is like a Medusa effect. You can evolve this to kill anything, or you can drop it without evolving it, and it will still likely kill something. It's pretty decent, but Forestcraft playstyles don't usually rely on just pretty decent followers. Every expansion has released decent followers like Lilac, and basically none of them see play. So overall 0. But now for the most important question, who wins in a fight? Lilac or Owlcat? Next, Ferry Driver, 4 mana 3/3. Whenever an allied fairy comes into play, give it +1/+0 and Storm until the end of the turn. This has interesting combo potential with Lionel and Fairy Cage. It's not going to be any more consistent than the shenanigans you can pull off with Roach though. Overall -1. Next, Kindly Treant, 3 mana 2/3. Fanfare, gain +1/+1 and Ward if there are at least 3 neutral cards in your hand. It's not a bad card, but it does compete with Grimnir and Ancient Elf, and those cards are a lot better, even in a neutralcraft deck. For a budget deck, this is a bronze card that can replace a gold or legendary pretty well, but in direct comparison, it doesn't compare. Overall -1. Onto Havencraft, Princess Snow White, legendary, 2 mana 1/2. Last words, summon a Princess Snow White and evolve it, then remove all effects on this follower. Snow White is a classic. In my collection I have figures of Snow White and all 7 dwarves. The Snow White is not Disney, but unfortunately the 7 dwarves are. I try to avoid Disney in my collection, not because I dislike the Disney movies, I actually do like them, but once you start collecting Disney, it just gives off the impression that you're more of a Disney fan than a fairy tale fan, so I try to avoid it. And of course I also have a copy of the Brothers Grimm story. As for the card, if you played Hearthstone, this is kind of like a reverse Harvest Golem. It's a 1/2 that summons a 2/3 when it dies. I cannot say whether Rush is an added effect of evolving or whether it's an intrinsic effect, so it might get removed due to the last words card text. That's not going to really affect the score though, since she's likely to die on your opponent's turn anyway. She's not super impressive, but she is basically the only sticky follower that Haven has access to, so that could make her useful in the right deck. Alana Haven relies on buffing followers, so she might be decent there. Ultimately though, she just feels kind of underwhelming for a legendary. Overall -1. Next, Alice's Adventure, 2 mana Amulet. Whenever an allied neutral follower comes into play, subtract 1 from the countdown of all allied amulets. This card is okay for normal countdown amulets, but it does allow for a neutralcraft Seraph or Tarnished Grail deck, in which the countdown reduction cards are replaced with more generally useful neutral followers. Overall 0. Next, Hottie, 6 mana 3/7. Fanfare, gain Rush and Bane if an evolved enemy follower is in play. In Norse mythology, Hottie is a wolf that chases the moon across the night sky. His counterpart Skoll chases the sun during the day. This is a fair card for answering your opponent's evolve followers without using an evolve of your own. Haven does already have plenty of ways to do that though, including hard removal, Judge of Retribution, Blackened Scripture, just to name a few. I think for the utility and cost, Haven already has better options, so overall -1. Onto Runecraft, Mysterian Grimoire, 3 mana 1/2, Fanfare, draw 2 cards. At the end of your turn, discard all spells in your hand. Generally speaking, this seems pretty bad. In Shadowverse you typically pay 1 mana to draw a card, so this is a 1 mana 1/2 and 2 mana to draw 2. But if you discard any cards, you're already paying more than that. You could also draw into spells that immediately get discarded. Spells also tend to sit in your hand for a while, so you can play them at the right time. So this card could be very clunky. It might work in a very follower heavy deck that runs very few spells and needs to cycle a lot for some reason. But even then, you never really want to discard valuable spells. I just don't see it working in any deck. Overall, -2. Next, Carbuncle of Mysteria, 2 mana 2/1. Last words, spell boost the cards in your hand. So, it's a reverse Conjure Golem with 1 less HP. It dodges spell discard effects from Wizardess of Oz and Mysterian Grimoire. Not really much else to say about it. It's alright. Overall, 0. Next, Gingerbread House, 3 mana Amulet. Fanfare, deal 2 damage to an enemy follower, restore 2 defense to your leader. This is a reference to the fairy tale Hansel and Gretel, in which the siblings are abandoned in the woods to die, but after wandering around they happen across a house made of gingerbread and candy, and start eating it. The hag that owns the house then captures them and attempts to eat them instead. Also note that the term hag can refer to a witch, and the Japanese name for the Runecraft class is witch, in English. So this is a fitting card for the class. As for the card itself though, it's basically another red hot ritual or price of magic, so there's not much to say about it. Earthright Rune needs a boost, not more of the same cards. Overall, -1. Next, Abomination Awakened, legendary, 3 mana 6/6, can't attack. If the number of cards in your hand increases to 9 during your turn, evolve this follower and deal 3 damage to all enemy followers. Evolved, this remains a 6/6, but can attack. It's a decent Evo target, and it's obviously strong if you can proc it, but it's going to be wildly inconsistent. Runecraft can put together a big hand, but the key is being able to put together exactly a 9-card hand, exactly when you want to, and that's not going to be easy. Overall, -1. Next, Apprentice Sword Mage, 4 mana 3/4, Fanfare, gain +1/+1 if the number of neutral cards in your hand equals or exceeds the number of Runecraft cards in your hand, excluding this card. If you're playing neutralcraft, Alice and Tina are going to be the go-to 4-drops, and if you need more 4-drops, Impartial Strix is a 5/5 when it procs, while this is only a 4/5. Not only is this card already outclassed, but keep in mind that class neutralcraft cards are a little anti-synergy as well. So overall, -2. On to Shadowcraft, Caterpillar of Riddles, 4 mana 4/3, Fanfare, give all other allied neutral followers +1/+1, deal 2 damage to all other allied Shadowcraft followers. This guy shouldn't need any introduction. He is another Alice character who appears in the first book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. He's basically a mini Alice that's a dick to Shadowcraft cards. One key point of Alice though is that she buffs your hand as well, meaning she's not strictly a win more card. His effect is a little bit better than Apprentice Sword Mage, but I still think he's outclassed, and he's also anti-synergy as well, so he's not really going to be worth it. Overall, -1. Next, Dark Alice, legendary, 7 mana 5/5. Last words, banish all allied Shadowcraft cards in play and summon a Dark Alice. At the start of your next turn, banish all Shadowcraft cards in your hand and your deck. Another Alice card. If you're wondering how many Alice cards are in Rage of Bahamut, there are quite a few. They could probably give every class an Alice legendary if they wanted to. I also didn't really talk about Alice with the first Alice card, so I might as well use this opportunity. This channel actually started with Alice. I used Alice Madness Returns to test recording, editing, and uploading, so if you go all the way back to my oldest videos, that's what you'll find. As I said, I'm a pretty big Alice fan. I have a collection of various Alice stuff, and if you want some recommendations on books, 2 of my favorites are the Alice Madness Returns art book and the August 19th, 2014 edition of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, published by 7 Seas, which has tons of manga-style artwork throughout the book, and contains both Alice books complete and unedited. annotations on the screen and links in the description. As for the card, at its most basic level, this is a neutralcraft Mordecai that costs 1 less. If you're running all neutral cards, then all she does is resummon herself when she dies. The card text does allow for some potential deck control, however. For example, you could put this in a normal Shadowverse deck and just run late game neutral cards. That way when you play Dark Alice, you discard most of your deck and only keep your late game to draw. There's also the Erd combo. You can duplicate Alice once with her, however your opponent can kill one Alice to get the other one banished. So it's not a permanent duplication the way you can duplicate Mordecai, unless you also combo it with Into the Looking Glass. Also, curiously, Alice has anti-synergy with Nephthys, but Nephthys has pro-synergy with Alice. Since you can put Nephthys into an Alice deck, specifically to pull Alice, but you definitely don't want to put Alice into a normal Nephthys deck. And finally, this has powerful combo potential with Path to Purgatory. You could play double Midnight Haunt one turn, and then Alice the next turn to banish your Midnight Haunts and gain 26 permanent shadows. You could also combo Alice with Soul Conversion just to guarantee that the Midnight Haunts are banished, since they're only on the board for 2 turns. Anyway, there's clearly some potential here. At worst, she's a neutralcraft Mordecai, but she could end up being even better than that, so overall +2. Next, Dead Moroz. 5 mana 5/7. Fanfare. Destroy all other allied Shadowcraft followers. Restore X defense to your leader. X equals the number of followers destroyed by this effect. So Dead Moroz, aka Grandfather Frost, is the Russian Santa Claus. Yep, this guy is Santa. Don't ask me how this guy is Santa. I have no idea. The Rage of Bahamut card has the same name, but the flavor text offered no insight, so your guess is as good as mine. Nice shirt though, I would wear that shirt. This guy is basically an upgraded Dollar Blade. You don't even need to kill anything to get the buff. He's overstated by default, he activates all of your Attendant of the Nights and Hell's Unleashers, and potentially gives other benefits like clearing an enemy follower with Lurching Corpse. And he also ignores your neutral cards, so if you have like a Eunuch on the board, she gets to survive. And for the icing on the cake, he even heals you. Forget what I said earlier, I know exactly why this guy is Santa Claus. He comes with all the gifts, all of them. And even if he doesn't do much, you still have typical cards like Ektar or Immortal Thane to fall back on, so he's kind of insane. Overall +2. Next, Corpse Lord of Woe, Legendary, 4 mana 4/4, can't attack. At the start of your turn, use Necromancy 6, evolve this follower. And evolved, he remains a 4/4, but can attack, and gains last words, summon a Corpse Lord of Woe. There are so many can't attack, evolve, can attack followers this expansion. It's kind of like a bigger Grave Desecration. You pay 4 mana, and every time you collect 6 shadows, you get a 4/4 with Rush. On the minus side, it's a bigger investment, it's a lot slower, and it only has last words when it actually is evolved, so your opponent can kill it when it's unevolved. It seems pretty bad. Overall -2. Next, Nightmare Executioner, 4 mana 0/3, Bane, Clash, draw a card. It's the classic Bellringer Angel plus Bane combo made into a card. It does lack ward, but it's not a bad evolve target. You get to kill basically anything and draw a card, and possibly keep this on the board as well. Pretty decent, overall +1. Onto Swordcraft, Hero of Antiquity, Legendary, 8 mana 6/10, Rush. Can't be destroyed by spells and effects, but it can be destroyed by damage from spells and effects. So this guy is immune to hard removal and Bane effects, but if you deal enough damage to it, it will still die normally. The main competition for this guy is Fangblade Slayer, who sees play in some mid-range and control decks. The Bane and face damage from Fangblade is relevant in a lot of games though. Hero of Antiquity does have higher stats and does dodge hard removal, but Fangblade's damage comes the turn right before you drop an Enhanced Albert. I think Hero of Antiquity loses out in utility, so he won't make the cut in any net decks, but his power is comparable. So I'll give him an overall of 0. Next, Young Ogre Hunter Momo, 3 mana 2/2, Rush. Clash. Gain Bane until the end of the turn if the enemy follower has at least 5 attack. If you recall, Old Man and Old Woman are the parents of Momotaro from a Japanese folktale. Well, this is a gender-bender version of Momotaro and the daughter of that elderly couple. As for the card, it's like Dragoon Scyther or Ruthless Assassin, but even cuter. Hard removal for 3 mana is pretty useful, but the condition does mean that you can't use this against a lot of cards. In a meta with mostly aggro or mid-range, this won't be very useful. In a control-heavy meta though, it could see some play since it's easier to proc than Ruthless Assassin. Overall 0. Next, Cinderella, legendary, 3 mana 4/4. Whenever another allied Swordcraft follower comes into play, return this follower to your hand. Well known for being bad at keeping track of time and wardrobe malfunctions, Cinderella should need no introduction. I don't actually have anything related to Cinderella in my collection aside from various versions of the story from Hans Christian Andersen, The Brothers Grimm, and Pop Wonderland. The classic versions of the story can be pretty brutal to Cinderella's stepsisters, by the way. As for the card, she is a terrible commander. She runs away from battle every time she sees a fellow soldier. Someone needs to give this girl a demotion. Seriously though, she's basically an overstated card with some really good support cannon synergy. In that deck, the late game combo potential is pretty crazy. So overall +2 for support cannon decks. Next, Kiss of the Princess. 3 mana spell, give a neutral follower +2/+4, then change that follower into a Swordcraft commander. There are a lot of people going around kissing amphibians in fairy tales, but the classic has to be the Frog Prince, the most well-known version of which is by the Brothers Grimm. It's not a bad buff for a neutralcraft deck. A zoo deck might run it. So Commander Unica, Commander Bellringer Angel, Commander Hamsa. Promotions for everyone. Overall +1. Next, Rabbit Ear Attendant. 3 mana 2/3, Fanfare, draw X cards, X equals the number of allied neutral cards in play. This card was released during an Alice event in Rage of Bahamut. I'm not sure how she fit into the event, but she's not supposed to be the actual White Rabbit. This card is pretty crazy in neutralcraft, and no, we haven't gotten to the neutral cards yet. Sadly, this is a Swordcraft card. It's fair value even if it draws nothing, so any cards it draws just increases the value from there. Overall +2. Alright, now on to the neutral set. First up, Angelic Knight, 3 mana 2/2, Ward. Fanfare, give +1/+0 to an allied follower. There's not much to say about this card. We've already looked at a lot of neutralcraft buffs, and even though this can give a buff to a non-neutral card, it's still pretty underwhelming, so overall -1. Next, Explosion. 7 mana spell, deal 3 damage to all followers. Since Humpty Dumpty is already in the game, we get a spell featuring him instead. Humpty Dumpty is the title character from the classic nursery rhyme, and he's been referenced in countless media, including the second Alice book, Through the Looking Glass. This is basically Conflagration meets Demonic Storm for the neutral set. Demonic Storm sees play while Conflagration doesn't, since the extra burst damage and 1 mana discount do matter. This is one of the few neutral AoEs, but in a neutralcraft deck you typically play class-based spells anyway, since you aren't hurting your synergy that much. So most classes will have a better option. Overall -1. This is also a good time to mention a thought I had after I reviewed the first Alice card. If you hand buff Humpty Dumpty with Alice, then he gets to survive his evolve effect. Just a little interesting interaction. Next, Rapunzel, 3 mana 2/5. Can't attack when played or at the start of your turn. Whenever another allied follower has attacked this turn, this follower can attack until the end of the turn. Another classic from the Brothers Grimm, and featured not so recently in the Disney film Tangled. Much like her fairy tale counterpart, she's useless without some assistance. She's stuck in her tower until she gets help from someone else. She gains 2 stats over the normal power curve, but she pays for it with a pretty significant drawback. If you played Hearthstone, she's basically a Slithed Swarmer. She's a semi-Winmore card, but when played on curve, your opponent might not be able to remove her immediately. And then even if you're behind, you can play something, evolve it, and then activate her to catch up. In the right deck, she's not too bad. Overall 0. And the last card for today, Queen of the Dread Sea, Legendary, 10 mana 7/7. Fanfare, change the cost of a neutral card, excluding Queen of the Dread Sea, and a non-neutral card in your hand to 0. Then discard all other cards in your hand. First of all, this card art looks amazing. Also, it might be original artwork for Shadowverse because I could not find it in the Rage of Bahamut database. As for the card, it's expensive at 10 mana, but you do get to combo it instantly with 2 other cards, which can make for some insane win conditions. This is probably the most interesting card in my opinion since Nephthys. I haven't even begun to think about the potential combos, but I could probably come up with at least 1 or 2 for each class. This is a card I look forward to playing with. Overall, +2. And that's all for today. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Feel free to share your opinions and thoughts in the comments below. And tune in again next time.